All right. Are we going? Is this freaking thing live yet? Maybe. Could be. Looks like yep, that started up. Test, test, test. And yeah, looks like we are in full live mode again. All right. Good evening, everybody. How's it going? Man, this light is like super bright. I'm gonna tone it down just a little bit so that you can see my eyeballs. Doesn't matter. I got slanty eyes anyway, so. Or as my family in New Zealand would say, I have the Matthews eyes. So, any rate, good evening, everybody. We are. This is night. What are we on? We're on night 5. Been doing this for 5 nights in a row. Reading from my latest book, Pavor Nocturnus, and we are on chapters 8 and 9. We're going to be finishing this up tomorrow night. I'll be reading chapter 10. It's the longest chapter, and it is actually going to tie all of the stories that we've read previously. It'll tie them all together and kind of give us a final, whatever you want to call it, conclusion, closure, for you folks that need closure, even on the stories you read. I'm going to give it to you because that's what a good guy I am. Anyway, drinking from the Whakariki Mai cup. I'm not sure if that's really a Maori word, but we're just going to say it is. I'm actually drinking Highlander grog with a little Kahlua creamer in there, and the non-alcoholic Kahlua creamer because we're not drinking until tomorrow night. Anyhow, really exciting news. The book is out now. So you can log on to Amazon and look up, it's easier if you just go Bradley L. Boddicker, and page of all my books should pop up. Pavor Nocturnus is on there. You can pick it up in paperback and on Kindle. Let's see what we got here. Doop-de-doo. Nope. Okay. So the Kindle version is $7.99, and I believe the paperback is $16.99. Yeah. So that is available now. So if you wanna purchase that, you can purchase that now. You should be able to get it by Thursday or Friday, is what they're saying. I haven't even gotten my copy yet, my author's copy. Should be arriving Wednesday, is what they said. So, anyways, I'm super excited about that. The launch of the new book, which I kind of wanted it to fall on tomorrow, but the sooner the better, right? Right. So, and anyhow, tonight's reading is going to be chainsaws and hot tubs, and the other story that we'll be reading will be Aunt Dottie's Wake. So let's get into it here. Chainsaws and Hot Tubs is a story that was derived from a nightmare that was given to me by my friend Lori. Her and I went to high school together, and we kept in touch after high school as adults. And she's also been a very loyal readership of mine, which I greatly appreciate. And yeah, so she sent me a nightmare. Said the nightmare happened when she was around 8 or 9 years old, and she was running from a maniac with a chainsaw, and for some reason there was a hot tub in the middle of her living room. And that was my prompt. So I came up with this little gem, if you want to call it that, called Chainsaws and Hot Tubs. And without further babbling, Let's get it on! All right. April is never a guarantee for warmer weather in Minnesota, even less so in northern Minnesota. It was nearly the end of the month, and there was still over 3 feet of snow on the ground in Agate Bay, Minnesota. Lori Harris was 8, and usually a positive, happy kid. Her parents had left for the weekend to go skiing at Afton Alps Ski Resort down in the Twin Cities. She was left with Vicky Hanska, who was a local young adult who had watched Lori for the last 5 years. Lori was outside playing in the snow. Inside, Vicky was calling a few of her friends to invite them to come over for a hot tub party. The Harris home was equipped with an indoor jacuzzi planted in the rec room on the first floor of the house, between the kitchen and the living room. It had been a long winter and a snowy one. A total of 17 feet had fallen on the Iron Range over the season, and everyone had cabin fever and a slight chill in their bones that would probably develop into arthritis when they reached their 50s. So Vicky's friends had thought a hot tub party was a grand idea. A grand idea indeed. Outside, Lori was playing in the snow fort she and her father had built in the backyard. They had spent an entire weekend hollowing out the massive mound of snow. Her dad put a fire pit in the middle of it with an hole in the roof for ventilation. They had a couple of fires in there already, and the heat from it had glazed the walls with ice. There was a long tunnel big enough to crawl through that took you to the only door in and out of the fort. They had hung a large towel at the entrance and a packing blanket at the opening to insulate it. She had wished her dad was here now to light another fire. She wasn't allowed to touch matches or her mom's cigarette lighter. So she sat in the cold dampness of her fort alone. She did love that quiet, but it was also lonely. Lori crawled out of her fort and saw that fresh snow was falling in giant flakes silently to the ground. She giggled and tried to catch them on her tongue. She enjoyed the silence of winter, with maybe only the sound of the wind blowing across the pine trees that bordered their property. She would lay herself onto a thick blanket of fresh snow and watch the flakes fall gently onto her face. Her solace would be interrupted. Somewhere to her left, she had heard what sounded like a large boot shifting in the snow. When temps are chilly, the crunch would be loud. She sat up and looked around. It was hard to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, and it only happened once. "Hello?" she said to the darkening evening. There was no answer except for the northwesterly breeze that whistled through the pine branches. If her parents were home, she wouldn't think anything about it, but she knew the reality of their absence, and even more hideous reality, that they were far away. She got a sick feeling in her stomach and stood up awkwardly in her snowsuit and clopped her way to the front door in her heavy snow boots. "Hey, Lori," Vicky greeted. "Did you get too chilly?" "No," Lori answered. She pulled off her layers of clothes, jacket, hat, mittens, snow boots, snow pants, left them in a heap, and ran into her room. Vicky grimaced. This was unlike her. Usually she'd beg her to come outside with her. But that look on her little 8-year-old face was fear. It made something dance in her stomach. "Lori," she yelled down the hallway. "Lori, are you okay?" There was no answer, so she walked down the hall to Lori's bedroom. Buried in a multitude of stuffed animals, Lori's face stared at the ceiling, her cheeks red from the cold. "Hey, kiddo, what's the matter?" Vicky sat on her bed beside her and removed stuffed bears and dogs to see her better. "I think there's a man out there," Lori said without any emotion in her voice. "A man? Are you sure?" "I'm not sure, but I heard him." Sometimes, when the wind blows hard enough, it will stretch those pine trunks and they will creak. "Maybe you just heard the woods. It's kind of windy out there." "Maybe." Vicky thought briefly that it was Henry Gillis. They had been flirting quite a bit with each other, and He was known to play pranks. "Why don't I go take a look around, okay?" Vicky asked Lori. "Please, don't go out there." "Honey, it's okay. I'm just going to look around. I'll just walk around the outside of the house. You'll be able to see me in the windows, okay?" Lori nodded. After Vicky stuffs herself into her own fashionable snow attire, a shiny parka with faux fur around the hood, with matching thin-soled snow boots, she grabs a flashlight and opens the heavy wooded door, allowing large flakes to dance their way into the foyer. Lori immediately runs to the thin rectangle windows on either side of the door. She cups her little hands to watch her babysitter slowly search the heavily wooded border of the remote home. She then ran to the living room bay window. As Vicky walked along the front side of the house, Lori had no idea what she would do if the circle of light lit upon some strange man hiding amongst the pines of her yard. Would she scream? Would she run? "Whenever you feel unsafe," her father would say, "call 911 and hide until help comes." She looked around the room and eyed the telephone sitting on the end table next to the chair her dad would smoke his pipe by the fireplace. She turned and saw that Vicky had gone. Panic rose up in her gut, and she gasped. She ran to the dining room and pulled back the shades in front of the sliding glass door. Vicky was standing 4 feet from the door, and it made Lori jump, and a small squeak came out of her. "It's okay, honey," Vicky's voice muffled by the double-paned glass. After a long survey of the area, Vicky moved on, and Lori ran through the kitchen and through the French doors that led into the rec room. She took a quick glance at the phone hanging on the wall and then the wall-to-wall glass. Vicky had uncovered the hot tub for tonight's gathering, and the humidity had steamed up the glass. She wiped at the fogged glass with her sleeve of her shirt and cupped her hands around her eyes to find Vicky. Panic raised its ugly head again as she couldn't see her. She checked through several panels until she got to the glass door that led to the brick patio outside. Again, she jumped as Vicky opened the door just as she was peeking to look for her. "Oh my goodness," Vicky gasped. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." She hugged her gently. "Just let me go for a minute, okay? While I close the—" They both stood silently, as in the distance, from somewhere in the shadow of the pines, they heard a motor. A small engine that sputtered as if it had a rough idle. "What is that?" Vicky said, shining the flashlight behind her. The motor chugged and then roared to life. Vicky slammed the glass door shut. Lori saw the look of terror on Vicky's face. There was a decorative boat oar hanging on the wall. Vicky grabbed it and looked grimly at Lori. "I need you to call 911, Lori," she whispered. "I'm going to lock all the doors and come back here, okay?" "No," Lori pleaded with her. "Please, don't. I need you to help me out here, kiddo. There's no time to debate this." "What was that?" They could both hear the motor growling outside, muffled by the walls of the house. "Call right now." Lori ran to the phone while Vicky ran to the front door to lock it. 911, came the dispatcher's voice. "What's the nature of your emergency?" Lori didn't talk to many adults, leave alone someone in law enforcement. There's a man." "A man?" Lori heard the motor howl on the far side of the house, and Vicky let out a scream. "Please, help me!" Lori's voice was weak. "You'll need to speak up, honey. I can't hear what you're—" There was a loud metallic ripping sound as a chainsaw blade chewed its way through her parents' front door. Vicky came running into the rec room and grabbed Lori. "Come on, Lori," she squealed. "We have to go." "Hello?" came the dispatcher. "Hello? Is there anyone there?" Vicky grabbed the receiver from Lori. "Hello? This is 47622 Pineview Lane. There's some maniac with a chainsaw trying to get into the house. Please, send the cops." Ma'am, if this is a prank, you will be subject to... This isn't a prank, you stupid bitch. Get the cops here now. Now calm down and talk slowly so I can... The sputtering motor made its way from the foyer to the living room, roaring intermittently as the man lumbered his way looking for his victims. Oh my God, Vicky yelled. He's in the fucking house. She dropped the phone, and she and Lori ran into Lori's parents' room. There was a large, thick door that moved on a track and slid closed. There were 2 iron bolts that slid into metal slots like an old deadbolt. The motor roared to life again and began ripping its way into the solid wood door. Go hide, Vicky said to Lori. No, I want to stay with you, Lori protested. You can't. I have to fight. I need you to hide before he gets through the door. The rounded edge of the saw chewed its way through the door, spitting sawdust into her parents' room. She ran into their bathroom and climbed into the cupboard, and curled into a ball while Vicky took a stance, planting her feet into the floor and held the oar like a baseball player ready to bat. Mercifully, the saw got stuck in the door and stalled. Vicky could see the man struggling to pull the blade from the wound in the door. She started to chop at the saw with the oar, hoping it would bend it or break that murderous chain. It didn't seem that either was happening. No! Vicky screamed. No, you don't! But the man was able to get the saw out of the door, and she could hear him trying the ripcord. The motor sputtered to life again, and she could smell the aroma of gasoline. The saw blade made its way through along the edge of the door and began to chew on the bolts. Sparks flew in the air, and Vicky continued her assault on the blade of the chainsaw. The saw made its way through the second bolt, and the cut metal dropped to the thick carpet with the ends glowing orange. The man pulled the door open, and Vicky swung the oar with the edge of the oar chopping into the bridge of his nose. There was a smacking sound, and blood began to jet from his nostrils. He stumbled back, and then lumbered forward again. Die, motherfucker! She shouted, and gave him another whack. The saw started with one pull, and he immediately swung it to block the oar. It chewed into the old wood, and within seconds it split, with the wooden blade falling to the floor. Vicky lunged forward with the cut end and tried to penetrate the man's chest. He knocked it away and swung the saw in an upward arc and opened her face. She didn't scream at first until the blood leaked into her eyes. She tried to grimace, and gored flaps of what used to be her face opened up and hung painfully from her cheekbones. Lori looked through the crack in the cupboard and could see her babysitter run towards her and then slip in the puddle of blood that had gathered at her feet. Lori! Vicky had tried to say Lori, but without working lips it came out. Lori! Run! Lori! Please! Run! The man's chainsaw plunged into Vicky's spine, and her body spasmed, vomiting out large black gobbets of blood to paint the bathroom with. Lori wept both for Vicky and the thought that she was left to deal with this monstrosity alone. The man couldn't hear her crying over the chainsaw's chugging engines, nor could he hear the siren wail from the patrol car that had just shown up in her driveway. He did see the red and blue flashing lights reflecting through the windows. He shut off the chainsaw and began to walk away when he heard Lori's crying in the bathroom cupboard. She could see his worn, blood-stained work boots work their way to the bathroom sink. She was not aware that the police had arrived. She squinted, her eyes closed, and waited her discovery and the nightmare that would follow. But none came. Not at that moment. Dispatch, Deputy Orno said into his shoulder mic. Please put me out at 47622 Pineview Lane.
Copy, Victor 12.
Dispatch came back.
47622 Pineview Lane.
Orno saw that the front door had been ripped apart with something. Partial lights were on in the house, but there didn't seem to be any movement. Dispatch, do you got a contact name?
Initial caller was an 8-year-old girl by the name of Lori Harris. She should be with a babysitter by the name of Victoria Hanska.
Well, you might want to send me a couple of units, dispatch. Looks like there's been trouble.
Victor 2 to Victor 12.
It was his shift sergeant, Raymond Wyndham. Victor 2, copy.
I don't want you to go in there alone. Hang tight until backup arrives.
Copy that. Orno kept his mag light on the front of the house. He shined it back and forth, waiting to see any movement. He could only see shadows move with the movement of his light. Then he heard it. It was the sound of a small child crying. "Hello?" he called into the house. "Granite County Sheriff's Department." The only response was the distant crying of a little girl. "This is Deputy Orno. I'm here to help. Let me know if you're safe." The crying just persisted. The urge to climb the steps and go in was maddening. Victor 12 to Victor 2.
Victor 12, go ahead.
Do we got an ETA on backup? I got what sounds like a little child crying inside the house.
Stay put, Victor 12. Victor 6 and 8 will be there shortly.
Copy, sir. Orno stepped up onto the front porch. He surveyed the damaged door and peered inside to see if he could find the source of the crying. "Hello?" he repeated to the opening of the door. "Can you hear me? Are you safe?" The crying only persisted. He started thinking about his own daughter. If this was his kid and she was in danger, wouldn't he want the cop to fuck protocol and go in? "God damn it," he whispered to himself. He drew his Glock from its holster and walked across the threshold. Better to ask for forgiveness than ask permission, he thought. Lori wanted more than anything to leave the cupboard and run, but she thought for sure the man was waiting for her to do just that. So she sat and wept in her little hiding place. She heard a voice call from what seemed to be outside. Hope sprung up in her, and she slowly opened the cupboard door. Then she backed in, closing it quietly. Perhaps it's a trap, she thought. She didn't understand why this man wanted to hurt her, or why he wanted to hurt Vicky. Was he an old boyfriend? No, too old. But he really didn't seem to have an age. He was ageless. It was dark, and she only caught a glimpse of him while trying to run. His hair seemed long, dark, and greasy. His face was covered in shadows. He was big, either big-boned or very muscular. There was that male voice again, calling to her. He was saying he was from the sheriff's department. He sounded like he was in the house. "Hello?" it came again. "My name is Deputy Orno. I'm here to help." He was close. Lori pushed the cupboard door open slowly and looked around. There was no sign of the man. She took one foot out and then the other and paused for any movement. There was none, and she came all the way out and stood up. She could see the glow of the deputy's flashlight coming from her parents' room. "Help me," she squeaked. "Keep talking, honey," the deputy ordered. "I'll come to you. Stay where you are and keep talking." "Be careful of the man." Orno reached the bedroom and gasped at the wreckage of the heavy wooden door. Jesus Christ, he thought to himself. What the fuck happened here? "Can you see me?" he asked, walking into the bedroom. "I can see you," she said. Deputy Orno walked into the bathroom and stopped dead in its tracks. Vicky's ravaged body lay in a heap in a pool of blood that was already turning brown. "Do you know where the man is?" Orno asked, reaching his hand out to her. She shook her head and took his hand. He pulled her through the bedroom and out into the hall. "Victor 12 to dispatch," he said into his shoulder mic.
Victor 12, go ahead.
Dispatch answered. "I've got Lori Harris and one apparently deceased female I believe to be the babysitter, Victoria Hanska."
Copy that, Victor 12.
There's a male suspect at large. Appears to be using a chainsaw.
Come again, Victor 12.
A chainsaw. There are marks all over the place, and Victoria seems to be chewed up by something like that,
Victor 12, proceed with caution.
came the voice of Wyndham. Copy. We'll be waiting for you. Back up in my squad. As they made their way to the door, Orono heard a deep, throaty humming coming from somewhere else in the house. Oh, shit, he thought. That's a fucking chainsaw if I ever heard one. Orono told Lori to run, while he pulled his Glock out of its holster again. The saw met his swinging gun hand and ripped through his wrist with ease. The gun went off and then flew through the air with his hand, sending a trail of blood everywhere. As the deputy screamed out, Lori made her way into her snow fort. She had hoped the new snowfall would camouflage the entrance. She curled into a ball and covered her ears as she heard the last of the deputy's pleas while being ripped apart. She had dozed off and wasn't quite sure how long. She was awakened by the sound of gunfire. She crawled to the entrance and peeked out of the white towel and saw two other police officers firing their guns at the man. He jerked as the bullets tore into him, but he showed no sign of slowing down. "Dispatch! We have an officer down!" cried one of the deputies. "Send help!" The man bore down on the other cop, plunging the chainsaw into his chest. He tried to cry out, but vomited out his own blood instead. The one who was calling dispatch emptied his pistol and then ran into his squad. The chainsaw ripped through the driver's side door and buried itself into the deputy's side. Now she was truly alone. The wind had picked up, and nothing could be heard or seen within a few feet. She ducked back into her snow fort and cried herself to sleep. During her blackout period, the SWAT team had been called in. They were not able to find anyone fitting the description the deputies had given, and forensics from the BCA, the Bureau of Crime Apprehension, came up from the Twin Cities to process the crime scene. A few hours, and Lori's parents had come back after being called by the police department. The sheriff's department had begun a countywide manhunt for the suspect, while a few locals and Lori's parents put together a group to look for Lori, who was considered missing. "Do you think," Maud Harris tried to swallow her fears, she's... "Let's not talk like that, honey." Frank Harris tried to comfort his wife. "I'm going to check a few places and then we can start in the woods, okay?" She nodded and watched as her husband walked out of the sawed-apart door and into the crisp daylight air. Most of the house had been sectioned off by police tape, while forensics were checking out every clue they could. There was so much blood and body parts that they would be here for a couple of days. Frank went out to his tool shed first. The deputy guarding the area led him into the shed, and he looked around and didn't see a sign of his daughter. He walked out and looked grimly at the woods that surrounded his home. He thought about Lori being cold and alone out here in the woods. He couldn't fathom the horror she had witnessed at such a young age. That's when it hit him. "The snow fort," he thought. "She's got to be in the goddamn snow fort." He ran to the area where the fort had been built, barely seeing the entrance so cleverly hidden by the white towel. He was so excited that he didn't notice the deputy being stabbed through the throat from the back of his neck by a handmade hunting knife. Silently, the deputy gurgled some bloody bubbles and fell to the snowy ground. "Lori!" he called out, entering the fort. "Lori, please, be in here!" "Daddy?" She awoke and hurriedly pulled back the packing blanket. "Daddy!" He was shimmying his way down the narrow tunnel to the main room. "Oh, thank God," he said. "We thought you were—" "Daddy!" Lori broke out into tears and reached for her father. When they joined hands, something chewed through the ice walls and bit into Frank's leg. His eyes went big, and then he screamed out. The tunnel was painted a dark red with his blood. No! Lori yelled. Daddy, no! Pull me in, baby, Frank yelled at his daughter. He couldn't use his right leg anymore, and he knew for sure that the saw blade would come back for his other leg, or somewhere even worse. Lori dug her boots in and yanked her dad in as far as she could. Her father curled into a protective ball and then grabbed his daughter. It's okay, kiddo, he said, trying to comfort her. The police are here. But he didn't know that the man had already dispatched every officer in the house and surrounding area. Even his wife had been gored with the chainsaw. She lay beside the steaming hot tub, trying fruitlessly to hold her intestines in. They huddled by the far wall of the fort, and both screamed as the saw ripped through the opposite wall. Little particles of ice danced in the air like snowflakes. The saw cut several lines into the wall, and then stopped. They could hear the engine stop on the chainsaw. Then some crunching snow, and then a loud thump as the man threw himself into the cut ice. The wall buckled a little, creating several spider-webbed cracks. Frank pulling himself on top of his daughter to protect her from the coming violence. That crunching of snow again and another loud thump hit the wall. Portions of the wall began to fall in. The fort that these two had built with love and care was going to become their tomb. The thudding began relentlessly. The man was trying to punch his way through the wall. More of the fort began to fall and let in daylight. Snow and ice crystals obscured their view so they could only see a large, dark shape climb into the open hole of their fort. Stay back, you fucking bastard! Frank yelled. The man pulled out his hunting knife and lunged at Lori's dad. The blade slid to the hilt into his heart, and he could feel the muscle beginning to lose its rhythm, desperately holding on to life. Frank cried out and grabbed the man by the face. No, Daddy, she said, gripping him. The man reached out and took hold of Lori's hood and almost choked her. She unzipped her coat and slithered out of it, and ran to the hole in the wall. She looked back as the man pulled the knife out of her father and turned to face her. Daddy, she cried. Run, baby, he uttered. Run for the love of God! Run! As the man tried to lunge at her again, her dad grabbed his coat to give Lori a chance to get a head start. The man turned to her father and drove the hunting knife into his skull. Up under the chin, through the tongue into the roof of the mouth, making its way through the nasal cavity and the eye sockets, and making its final purchase into the brain. With little effort, he pulled the knife from his kill and then turned to see Lori run into the house. Lori screamed as she saw all the bodies and body parts strewn about the house. She slid on someone's discarded guts and landed next to her mother. She tried to scream, but nothing came out. Her mother's eyes were wide open, and her mouth was agape with blood just on the verge of coagulating around her lips. Mama, she whimpered. Mama, no. She cradled her mother's head in her lap, sobbing. The man came running in. The chainsaw was roaring full throttle. The scent of gasoline fought with the sharp scent of chlorine from the hot tub. Running with the saw raised above his head, Lori rolled her mother's corpse towards him, spilling her small intestinal tract across the ice-covered wood floor. His boot hit her mother's guts, and the inertia sent him sprawling. He hit her mom's body and went ass over tea kettle, hitting his head sharply on the edge of the hot tub. There was an audible crunch as the vertebrae in his neck snapped and instantly paralyzed him from the neck down. Lori stood up and began tugging on his coat. She successfully pulled him into the hot tub head first. She fell backwards into the hot tub with him. He couldn't move. His head was submerged under the water, and he began to panic. Gasping, his lungs took on the chlorinated water, burning his lungs. He tried to cough, but his struggles were beginning to get weaker and weaker. Lori backed out of the hot tub immediately and watched in horror as this man drowned. There was no struggle. She didn't know that he was paralyzed. She eyed the still sputtering chainsaw and then ran over and picked it up. As it roared obediently to life, she plunged it deep into his neck, severing the head from the shoulders. The hot tub bubbled with gore. Lori threw the chainsaw into the hot tub that sank next to the man's floating head. She cried, knowing that she was now orphaned and didn't know who was left to come and rescue her. In the distance, more sirens began to wail. And that is the end so far for Lori and chainsaws and hot tubs. And we'll hear more about her and everybody else in Chapter 10. We're going to move right into the next nightmare. Was given to me by a gal I work with. Actually, yeah, I think she retired now. But it's her name is Lynette. And the nightmare that she had emailed to me was that she was awake at a funeral parlor, and her and her cousins were snooping around and went into the basement where they do the embalming, and they heard moaning, and they ran back upstairs to tell the adults, and they didn't believe them. So, with that prompt, thank you, Lynette, we'll be getting into Aunt Dottie's wake. Everyone has that favorite aunt. The cool one who would talk about what it was like to kiss boys, go on dates, and go parking. The one who told your mom that she was being too overprotective. The one who would sit up and watch scary movies with you when your parents were out of town for the weekend. And you could drink all the soda pop you and eat all the sugary sweets you wanted. That was my Aunt Dottie. Her real name was Doris Lee Hutchinson, but everyone just called her Dot. She was my mother's only sibling, and they grew up in rural Moon Valley County in Minnesota. They were farm girls, and Mom was brought up to be a good Lutheran farm wife, and Aunt Dottie grew up to be a tomboy. She taught me how to hunt for night crawlers in the dark with a piece of red cellophane over a flashlight, where to catch sunnies and crappies out on Gibbous Lake, and how to fillet them without leaving the bones in. She took me turkey hunting once, but I got a little traumatized when it came time to shoot a tom when I had it in my sights. She didn't judge me. She just hugged me until I finished crying, and then we walked around the woods and looked for mushrooms. She never married because she loved her independence. She dated and was serious with a few of those quarters, but she never settled down. A big piece of me broke when my mother told me she had been hit by a Humvee or a Hummer when she was crossing the street to buy me a birthday present for my 9th birthday. The large SUV had rushed through a yellow light and struck her, sending her 6 feet in the air and then 9 feet back. Part of me expected this. It may sound strange to you, but I had a dream the night before. I was flying a kite in our backyard, and my kite had turned into my Aunt Dottie. "Auntie?" I had said to her. "Hello, sweetie," she shouted in the clear blue sky. "Auntie, what are you doing up there?" "I have to go, honey. I'm so sorry, but I don't want you to worry. I'll be okay." "Are you coming back?" "I may stop in once in a while, but you won't be able to see me, maybe sense me." "I don't understand." "I'm passing on, sweetheart. I don't know why or how, only that I'm no longer alive. But there will be times when you will be able to know that I'm there for a visit. Maybe you'll smell something that reminds you of me, or maybe you'll feel a pocket of cold air in just one spot." "That will be you?" "Yeah, Something like that. I began to cry in the dream, and perhaps I did while I slept, too. I don't remember. I remember waking up the next morning and asking Mom why people must die. And then Auntie Dot had expired that afternoon. I never understood why it was called a wake when you went to view a body before the actual funeral. But here we were. There was a large crowd of people at Crescent Funeral Home, some of whom I didn't even know. The entire family showed up, including everyone from Dad's side of the family. It was my first death in my young life. I had never seen my mom cry as hard as she did, and she always carried that grief around with her in the background until she passed away herself. I cried myself off and on. I was still having trouble grasping the idea that I would never see my auntie again. It didn't seem real, and the casket was closed due to the condition of her body. So I never got to see Aunt Dottie in death. There were so many people saying dumb things like, "She's in a better place now," or "God needed her more than us," or "Another angel has been called to home." I wanted to answer their stupid sayings with, "There's no better place than with us," or "God can make more people. Why did he need to take my auntie?" Or, "I thought God had an army of angels." It was all making me very angry at the big G in the sky. Thankfully, I had a couple of cousins from my dad's side that had shown up. They were around the same age as me and didn't say stupid things like that. Gary was the oldest of all of us, at 10 years old, and his sister Kelly Ann at 6. We hung out in the kitchen area where there were plenty of cookies and bars and Kool-Aid to keep us wired and away from the adults. Aunt Dottie was really good at baking. The treats they had on display here would have disgusted her. But beggars can't be choosers. And I was young and ate sugar as often as I could because my parents restricted it in our home. "This place creeps me out," Kelly had said, looking around. "You're such a chicken shit," Gary said. "I'm telling Dad you swore." "Whatever. You're always scared of something. You're such a spaz." "Well, it is a funeral parlor," I reasoned. "There's dead people here." Kelly felt vindicated and produced her tongue to her brother. Gary ignored her and looked around. "Do you think there's dead people here now? I mean, besides your aunt, of course." "I don't know. I guess there would be." "Where do you think they keep them? Before the wakes and funerals, I mean." "In the basement, maybe?" "Why the heck would you want to see where the dead bodies are?" Kelly socked her brother in the arm. Gary walked towards a dimly lit hallway. "Do you think the stairs are down here?" he asked. "I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea, Gary," I said. "Come on. We're just going to take a look." I thought about it for a minute. Kelly had a definite no vibe going. The thought of seeing a dead body seemed both frightening and exciting at the same time. I found myself walking with Gary down the hall with Kelly in tow. At the end of the hall were 2 sets of stairs, also dimly lit. I thought it was odd that we couldn't hear even a murmur of the wake going on just down the short hallway. Gary had already descended the first set of stairs, and I took a deep breath and began to follow him. Kelly grabbed my hand tightly. I really don't want to go," she began to whimper. "It's going to be okay, Kelly," I tried to comfort her. "We're just going to take a peek and then come back upstairs, okay?" "Come on, you guys," Gary said halfway down the second set of steps. Kelly and I walked slowly down the steps and met up with Gary at the bottom. We both gasped. Open caskets lined both sides of the room. They were empty, but they were frightening nonetheless. Even more crazy, on the opposite side of the room, was an open doorway. We couldn't see what was inside of it because there were no lights on in there. Just a depthless black that seemed to emit a coldness that raised the tiny hairs on my arm. "I bet they're in there," Gary said with a grin on his face. "It's cold down here," I said. "I want to go back upstairs," Kelly added. "Quit being a baby," Gary scolded his sister and walked closer to the dark room. As we approached the doorway, there was a placard that read, "Preparation." Gary reached his hand into the room and felt around for a light switch. There was a loud snap, and then the overheads buzzed and popped on in a cold blue light. We gasped again. 2 metal tables reflected that awful blue light, surrounded by jars and vials and rubber tubing. The far wall was lined with 6 square metal doors. One of them stood ajar. "What do you think?" Gary asked. "Think there's bodies in those coolers?" I shivered, thinking about my Aunt Dottie being in those cold boxes. "Can we go now?" Kelly asked. "No, we can't. We haven't seen a dead body." A low moan came from the opposite side of the room. It sounded like there was a globule of phlegm in the owner's throat. We froze in place. "What is that?" I screamed. I, Gary stuttered. "I don't know." That moan came again. This time it was louder and sounded closer. Kelly let go of my hand and ran back to the stairs, screaming. I grabbed Gary's arm and tried to pull him. "Come on," I urged. Let's get out of here." One of the doors banged on its hinges, and we both turned and ran. Kelly saw us running, and she darted up the steps. I barely felt the steps as I flew up them. We made it back into the kitchen and tried to catch our breath. I could still feel the cold. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Gary said, looking about 10 shades whiter. "Maybe we better tell someone." At that moment, my mother came into the kitchen. When she placed her hand on my shoulder, I jumped for what felt like 20 feet into the air. "Well, shit, Lynn," she gasped. "Where the hell have you kids been?" I didn't know what to say. Spit it out." "We went downstairs," Gary belted out. "We went downstairs and then heard some moaning and ran back up here." Mom looked at Gary like he had just told a crude joke, and then looked disappointingly at me. "What?" Mom said to me, and then looked over at Kelly and Gary. "What are you going on about?" "We went downstairs," Gary said, looking down at the ground. "I'm sorry, Aunt Renee. It was my idea. Just wanted to look around. We went into this preparation room and we heard some moaning coming from one of the fridges they keep the bodies in." "He's telling the truth," I finally spoke. "It was a really scary moan." "What's all this nonsense?" It was Dad walking in. "They were wandering around the funeral home and ended up scaring themselves in the morgue, I think," Mom said. Dad kneeled down to look us in the eyes. "Listen up, kids," he said with some authority. "This day is hard enough on your mother without you misbehaving at your auntie's wake." "But Uncle Dave," Gary pleaded. "That's enough. I won't tell my brother what you've been doing, but if you kids can't behave, you'll have to sit in the car." "But Dad," I said. He didn't interrupt me because I was the princess back then. "We really did hear a voice down there. It was really scary. Can't you just come down and—" "Lynn, that is enough. Have some consideration for your mother and respect your aunt." I apologized to my parents, and they both went back out to the wake. The 3 of us didn't say a word to each other and walked into the sitting room just off the kitchen. "Well, now what?" Gary said. "What do you mean, now what?" I spat. "Now we just sit here. It's over. And then we go home." "Yeah," Kellyanne agreed. Forget you two, Gary said. We heard something. You know we heard something. Are we just going to sit around and pretend we didn't hear a ghost? There are no such things as ghosts, Gary, I said. Then what was that noise we heard? I didn't have an answer. I don't want to get in trouble anymore tonight. This is Aunt Dottie's wake, and I want to respect her like my dad told me to. Something caught the corner of my eye. I could have sworn the hallway light flickered. Gary noticed me turn pale. What? He asked. What do you see? Nothing, I said. It was nothing. Kelly's eyes got wide, and she backed away to the other side of the room. You saw something. I know you did. Just drop it, Gary. That's when the light flickered in the room we were in. We all jumped and stood up. That low guttural moan echoed faintly down the hallway toward us. It's back, Gary said. We stood together, staring at the doorway. It was cold again, and there was butterflies trying to tear themselves from my stomach. Hello, children. A man's voice came from the kitchen. We all screamed, and a man who looked older than my father stepped into the sitting room. His face was pale and waxy, and there wasn't a single emotion on his face. Thin hair was slicked back with some sort of shiny Brill cream. So sorry to have frightened you, he continued. He wore a black suit with a narrow tie, attached to a bright white shirt. Did you need some refreshments? We have cookies and brownies. No, sir, I said. We already had a bunch. Thank you. What a delightfully polite little girl you are. His smile was thin and forced. What's going on in here? It was my father again. This time he was fuming. I thought I told you kids to settle the hell down. My fault, sir, the man said. I've regrettably frightened them when I came in to check on them. And you are? Apologies again, sir. My name is Mr. Sin. I'm the proprietor here at Crescent Funeral Homes. Mr. Sin, huh? What happened to Daniel Ballard that used to run this place? Well, Mr. Ballard retired a few months back. Went to Boca Raton, I believe. I didn't realize. He retired. Well, good for him. Anyhow, the kids aren't giving you problems, are they? Not at all, sir. Well, they've been acting up tonight. If they give you any trouble, come find me and let me know, and I'll deal with them. Begging your pardon, sir, but they are young. Dealing with death is not an easy thing for children to digest. So their grief comes out in different ways. Dad frowned at Mr. Sin and then looked at the three of us. I don't want to have to come up in here again, he scolded. Do you kids understand? We all nodded obediently, and Dad left. Well, children, Mr. Sin said, what seems to have you all so shaken? The light flickered again. It was almost like a strobe light, and everything in that room moved unnaturally. Nothing, sir, I said, averting my eyes from him. Nothing, you say? No, sir. It's just that funeral homes are a little creepy. I thought I saw a grin on his face. That is, until my cousin Gary spoke up. We went downstairs, he blurted out. We heard a ghost. Mr. Sin frowned for a moment, and the lights got really crazy and then stopped. The thin-lipped grin returned to the mortician's face, and he gave a knowing glance at me, then Kellyanne, and then to Gary. You heard a ghost, did you? He said. And what, pray tell, did ghosts sound like? Well, Gary began to stutter, and then turned red in the face. I really don't know. Oh, come now, Gary. Let us not be coy. Please humor me with what you heard. Was it a low-sounding boo?
Well, no, not exactly.
Maybe, just maybe, your cousin here could enlighten me. Kelly winced and moved behind her brother. Mr. Sin's gaze turned to me, and I got cold, so cold that the small hairs on my arms began to rise. Was it something like... Mr. Sin cleared his throat and let out a low, guttural moan that chilled all of us to the bone. Kellyanne screamed, and so did Gary. I was frozen. Is that what you heard? His grin returning to those awful thin lips. The three of us were huddled together, shaking in our Sunday best. He reached out for us, and we bolted. We tried for the French doors going out to the wake, but he blocked them. Our only choice was to head down that small hallway.
Where are we going?
Kelly yelped. Gary tried to some of the doors in the hallways. There was a utility closet, an office, and a consultation room. We turned around and hoped we could make it to the kitchen, but Mr. Sin was already blocking the hallway. Our only choice was the basement stairs. We ran down into the casket showroom and hid ourselves among the open coffins. Children, Mr. Sin spoke. This time his voice was changing, low and gravelly. His appearance had changed too. His head was thinner now, and went from waxy white to a pale blue. His eyes bulged in deep sockets. Welcome to the end of the line. You can't do this, I shouted at him. Our parents are upstairs. It would be unfortunate if I had to take care of them too, wouldn't it? He was backing us into the preparation room, his arms stretched to an impossible length as he herded us into the room with the cold storage. Gary spotted a saw on the metal table and snatched it up, holding it out to Mr. Sin. The man's head went back at an impossible angle, and his jaw dropped open to reveal what looked like the inside of a furnace. A deep laugh rumbled from within. What do you think you're gonna be doing with that? He laughed. And then that same square metal door rattled and then flew off its hinges and clattered to the ground. I had no idea how no one upstairs heard what was going on down here. A pale shape slithered from the refrigerator. It held the shape of what looked like a man, and then began swirling madly, all the while groaning in that awful, phlegmy voice. We spun around, and all of us screamed. We had horror on either side of us. Ah! Mr. Sin almost hummed. Dinner, as they say, is served. I was thinking he was talking about us, the kids, that we were the dinner. But the pale thing bounced off the walls and then struggled as something began to pull it towards Mr. Sin's mouth. Because the pale shape wasn't tangible, it had nothing to grab onto. It zipped into Mr. Sin's mouth, and that furnace inside him roared to life and then went dim. What? I sat there with my jaw agape. What are you? My dear child, he said, wiping his mouth. I don't know if there's a word that can define what I am. Let's just say that I am a fisherman. I don't get it. Of course you don't. Why would you? You see,
In your world, there are, I guess the simplest term would be portals. Yes, that sounds right. Portals. They usually appear in places of death, like cemeteries and hospitals. Sometimes very unfortunate homes. Usually near a body of water. So, are you from those portals? Oh, goodness, no. No, I'm... I guess in your world, you'd say I'm from hell proper. I fish at these portals. They teem with the souls of the deceased. And you eat them? Delicious. Their souls help me stay corporeal. Gary wrestled with the word in his mouth. Goodness sakes, I'm forgetting I'm dealing with children. Many pardons, young ones. Let me start again. Those souls, they help me stay real. I began to wrestle with my own words. Did I consume your aunt? Is that what you're asking me? Yes. Unfortunately, no. Her soul had left her body before her body died. Had I been in the emergency room, as she lay there, coughing up blood, then I would have gobbled her right up. I began to weep. You're a monster! One of his smooth, elongated fingers stretched out and scooped up my tears from my cheek. He licked his finger dry and then shivered as if in some sort of ecstasy. Oh, cheers, he moaned. Such a great side dish. Sadness tastes like a well-marinated steak. Leave her alone, my cousin Gary shouted and dove towards him with the handsaw. It was a valiant effort, probably the bravest thing I've ever seen my cousin do. The saw ripped into the gut of Mr. Sin. The thing let go of me and backed away a bit. He examined the saw stuck into his midsection, and then laughed a moment. He gripped the handle of it and pulled it out, dropping it to the ground. A silvery liquid began to seep out of the wound. He tried to stop it with his hand, and it looked at it dripping from his long, grotesque fingertips. A frown showed up on his face, and he looked over at Gary. What have you done, young man? It was an angry question. It was more of an unbelieving of what had occurred. Mr. Sin sauntered over to Gary and grabbed him by the throat and hiked him into the air. Gary gasped and fought for air, and he was lifted and pinned to the ceiling. Mr. Sin then began to shape his other hand into a fork and began spinning it towards the floor. No matter, brat. I'll just grab me some medicine from my stock. Sparks began to shoot from his fingertips as he created friction with the air around him. A green circle began to form, and suddenly there was an opening in the floor, a large glowing circle that housed an ethereal river within it. Let's see what's on the menu, shall we? Mr. Sin grinned a horribly large grin, still holding Gary to the ceiling. He dipped his arm into the portal and dug around until he found something. He pulled his arm out, and there was a purple mist writhing around his arm. I think it was a soul. A soul that was drifting through that river of death. Though death seemed like the wrong word. I was too young then and to contemplate the afterlife. But I think that's what it was. After life. I've come a long way since that horrible night. I was a good student, graduated top of my class in 1978 from Bryant Lake High School. Then on to St. Teresa's College in Winona, Minnesota, with a bachelor's in business. I had taken philosophy classes during that time, and had changed my thinking on the things they taught me when I was a young Sunday school student. To me, it's not us that dies. It's our bodies. Inside, the spark that makes us who we are keeps going. On to other things. Maybe not reincarnation, but just something else. I took comfort in that when my parents died. This thing, this monster that called itself Mr. Sin, was feeding on that spark. It had some uncanny access to this river of energies, and he used it like a fishing hole of sorts. He had to be stopped. That much I knew in my 9-year-old brain, but how? Mr. Sin sipped at the purple mist in his hand like it was a wad of spaghetti noodles. His body seemed to get bigger and longer and more solid. He swung Gary into the refrigerator units, and I heard something crack. Oh my God, I thought. He's killing him. There was still some kick left in Gary. Mr. Sin began to lick at the tears and the blood that was coming out of his face. Kellyanne, bless her, had grabbed a large needle that had a tube attached to it. It was a tool they used to bleed the corpses with. She ran at Mr. Sin and rammed it deep into his back. He dropped Gary, who thudded to the ground and laid there unconscious. I thought maybe he was dead, but he moaned and stirred in a heap at Mr. Sin's feet. He was trying to grab Kelly when I sort of tackled her and rolled, with her out of the way. We rolled under one of the metal tables. "Come here, you little shits!" he bellowed. We had heard him, and that was a good thing. "I will torture you all and savor the liquids that come out of your fear-stricken bodies." "I need you to run," I said to Kellyanne. "No," she pleaded. "If I try, he'll get me." "I'm going to distract him, and while I do, I need you to run and get my dad and your dad." "Please, don't make me do it." "I can't make you, Kelly, but if you don't, we're all going to die." Her bottom lip quivered a moment, and then she nodded. I bolted out from cover and slid between Mr. Sin's legs. He turned to grab me, and Kellyanne made it out of the room. I grabbed the metal door that had been knocked out earlier and tried to use it as a shield. Mr. Sin knocked it free from my grip and closed his long, bony fingers around my neck. He tightened them slowly. "I will eat your soul, young one," he hissed. "I will eat you slow and delight in the suffering you experience at my own hands." I don't know how I was able to stay conscious. Black dots began forming around me, and I felt like I was no longer attached to my body. Was this thing eating me already? "Get your hands off her, you shit," came a familiar voice. Mr. Sin turned, and floating above the portal was my aunt, or it looked to be something similar to my Aunt Dottie. "Someone you know?" Mr. Sin asked and began to grin, that horrible grin again. "That's my Aunt Dottie," I said in awe. Is this true? He asked the apparition. We don't have names over here, Auntie said. You know that. Ah, yes. I've gotten so used to the way things are here. Naming things. Naming offspring and brats. Carrying around identities as if that's important. But it must be important because you are here on behalf of the child. And you're almost corporeal. Time to go, kiddo, she said to me. Get your cousin and go. But, no buts, there's no time. I gathered up Gary, who looked like a mess. There was internal bleeding somewhere because it was coming from his mouth, and his breathing sounded a little bit like a gurgle. Behind us, Mr. Sin had climbed into the portal and looked as if he was going to try to feed on Auntie Dot. This will be delightful, he hissed at her and grabbed a hold of her shoulders. Notice anything different? She said with a familiar grin. What are you on about? I feel ecstatic. I'm going to feed on Wait. What are you doing? You have hold of my shoulders. Yes, that's because Wait, stop that. Stop what? You're doing something. You're feeding on you. Yes, you're feeding. How? Mr. Sin was shrinking, and he returned to the white, waxy figure he was before. He removed his hands from my aunt, and his fingers, though still hideously long, were beginning to shrink. Stop this, he whimpered. Aunt Dottie looked over his shoulder and straight at me. Time to go, Lynn. There are things here a little girl need not see. Show's over. But I wanted to ask her a million questions, but I only said, I love you, Auntie. I'll miss you. I love you too, little one. Now go. You've already seen too much. I struggled, helping Gary up the steps. I didn't know what I just witnessed, and I probably never will. Kellyanne had told our parents everything. They stood there with incredulous looks on their faces. When I showed up with a broken Gary leaning on my shoulder, leaking blood from his mouth, they had all run to us. What happened? Uncle Frank asked. I didn't know how to answer that question. Kelly had already leaked the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But they were adults, and we were children with overactive imaginations. I fell, Gary finally said. I went to go back downstairs to see a dead body, and I tripped and I fell down the steps. My father asked if that was true, but Gary came to our defense. I tried to get them to come with me, he said, but Lynn said she didn't want to get into any more trouble and wanted to respect her auntie. Kelly stayed back with her until they heard me yelling after I fell. I'm sorry. But Kelly looked hurtfully at both of us and then lowered her head in defeat. I guess that's what happened. Uncle Frank took Gary to the hospital. He was treated for a cracked rib and a few cuts and bruises. We were all grounded for a month. Worst of all, I had disappointed my parents. I couldn't look Mom in the eye ever again. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 9. Thank you guys. I've been able to do 2 stories in 1 hour. That's actually pretty good. I thought it would take longer, but I'll get into it. The hardest thing of this reading thing is coming up with different voices for the characters so you kind of know who's talking or whatever.
And I have a hard time keeping track of whose voice is who. Um, at any rate, I hope it makes it or adds a little more entertainment to the broadcast. Anyway, hey, you're very welcome, Jason. Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, I want to thank you guys. Really, seriously, I seriously can't thank you enough for buying my books in the past, supporting me. Thumbs up, liking all my stuff. I know I've been inundating all of my social media with little promotion videos for the book, and yeah, I mean it means a lot to me. I've been trying to give you guys some quality content in my books, and I don't want things to seem all hacky and everything. So I hope you're all enjoying my books, the ones you're reading. I hope you head over and pick up a copy for yourself, whether that's on Kindle or in paperback. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this launch. And tomorrow night, we were going to meet here at 9 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. And yeah, we're going to read Chapter 10, which is the last story of the book. It's called Joe Takes a Dirt Nap. And this story is going to tie all the stories that we've read together. And if you've joined me on this journey for all 5 days, you guys will hopefully enjoy hearing what happened to these dreamers when they woke up. So, at any rate, please spread the word and have your friends and family like this page, my Beehive page, and also head over to my YouTube channel, Bradley Boddicker 70 on YouTube, and have them subscribe onto there. I promise I won't spam anybody, and I promise I won't beg and plead for a bunch of other things. What it does, it allows me to do more with these live broadcasts on here. It allows me to do more programming on YouTube as well with more subscribers, and also the more content I put on, the more points I get as well. So, yeah, I'm just trying to broaden what I can do more that can, be entertaining and stuff like that. So, you guys liking my stuff and watching my stuff and spreading the word and subscribing to my stuff really does a lot for me, and it helps me go a long ways. You're very welcome. Stephanie, I thought you would love the accents on some of the people there. Anyway, yeah, so I can't thank you guys enough. We're going to do a little celebration tomorrow because it's Halloween and it's the final night of reading Pavor Nocturnus, another anthology of horror. I'm forgetting what I'm writing, but I think it's because I'm lacking a lot of sleep. Anyway, yeah, thanks again, folks. I hope you have a good night, and we will see you tomorrow night right here, this channel, at 9 o'clock Central Standard. Deuces, folks. Deuces. Have a good night.